want to thank the NFPA for giving us the opportunity to speak to you. And I know for many of you, this is still a very visceral topic, a very emotional topic. But the events of September 11, 2001 are now 23 years old. And I want to remind you that no plane hit the Solomon Brothers building. The Solomon Brothers building is better known as World Trade Center number 7. But no plane hit that, and no firefighter lives were lost in that building. So it's time to ask the hard questions. This is my team today. Eric Lawyer, retired Seattle firefighter. Richard Gage, architect, and firefighter Paul Cayley from the UK. We're here representing Protecting All Protectors Alliance. Right, so let's get going. My name is Raul Angulo. I'm a fire captain. I'm retired from Seattle Fire Department. I spent 38 years on the line. I started my career on Ladder 1, downtown Seattle, the high-rise district, and I ended my career as captain of Ladder 6 on the north end of Seattle, high-rise district. I've written over 350 articles in the various trade publications, firefighter trade publications, primarily with fire engineering and fire apparatus magazines. I was asked to write the 4th edition of Engine Company Fireground Operations, which is published by Jones and Bartlett Learning, but it's in conjunction with the NFPA. And I was very honored to be asked to do this. The 3rd edition needed updating. They didn't have a high-rise chapter, and I wanted to include that in the 4th edition. I spent about 5 years preparing and studying and reading for this book. But my marching orders from the publishers was that they wanted to include the studies from Underwriter Laboratories and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, otherwise known as NIST, and they wanted me to incorporate the studies of fire behavior in lightweight construction buildings with modern fire fuels. NIST and UL did numerous tests to show that today's fires burn faster and hotter, and how are we going to fight them? And so I trust that information. I trust NIST, and I want to bring your attention to that logo right there, NFPA. When I knew this was also an NFPA book, I took it very seriously. I took all my research seriously and studied everything, because to me that logo represents trust, reliability, and best practices. And I wanted my book to reflect that. So I finished the book, and I'm done. But where does it go? I don't know. But it went all over the world. I know for sure it went to Canada, Mexico, Istanbul, Turkey, and even India. But I didn't realize how many people outside the fire service are going to read what I wrote. And a textbook is different from a magazine. A magazine, you can have an opinion, but a textbook, they're taking that as fact. Well, after it was out, I was approached by many members from Protecting All Protectors Alliance, and they started asking me a lot of questions about World Trade Center 7. I said, well, what about it? I know it collapsed. Well, did you see all the videos? No. Did you read the NIST report? No. Well, did you read the report from the University of Alaska? The report by Professor J. Leroy Halsey, PhD, PE, SE, and all the other alphabets for structural engineer, physical engineer? No, I never even heard of Halsey. Well, I did find out after studying the report that Professor Halsey is the Vice Chancellor of Research, and his team of PhD researchers did another analysis of the collapse of World Trade Center 7. So I started looking at the videos over and over, and something just wasn't quite right. And the first thing I saw, which is the first thing that you're probably noticing too, is how straight that building comes down. Now, I've seen a lot of building collapses or partial collapses in my 38-year career, but I have never seen a building come down like that as a result of fire. So I did read the report from NIST.
According to a 3-year comprehensive building and fire safety investigation just completed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires. We really have a new kind of progressive collapse that we have discovered here, which is a fire-induced progressive collapse. And in fact, we have shown for the first time that fire can induce a progressive collapse.
That was Dr. Shazam Sunder from NIST. And what he said was, quote, World Trade Center collapsed because of fire. This is a new phenomenon, a new kind of progressive collapse that we have discovered here, the fire-induced progressive collapse due to thermal expansion. In fact, we have shown for the first time that fire can produce a progressive collapse. Well, that's a pretty profound statement. I've never heard of it in my 30 years. And then Dr. Sunder also went on to say that it was heat-induced failure of column 79 on floor 12 that caused a 47-story building to freefall. Well, it just doesn't sound that convincing to me. So I went to the University of Alaska report and I read it cover to cover. And here's the gist of it. They found two major things. Number one, they concluded, doing the same type of modeling with their own equipment and the Department of Engineers, that number one, fire did not cause the collapse of World Trade Center 7. And number two, they determined that global failure, total collapse, was due to near simultaneous failure of every core column in the building. Well, as an author, as a textbook author, as an international instructor with over 40 years of experience, that presented a problem for me. When I write a book, I want to put reliable, credible, trustworthy information. I'm writing a textbook, and my second book is coming out, Ladder Company Fireground Operations. I'm basically telling firefighters, this is how we're going to do it. And I want to give them accurate information. I'm very familiar with the first interstate fire. I used that case study in my book. And to date, it is still the #1 case study, high-rise fire in America. That building is still standing today. It burned over 4 hours and never collapsed. Today, it's in downtown Seattle, or downtown Los Angeles. It's the Aon building, but it's in service and never collapsed. One Meridian Plaza, another great case study that I used in my book. The problem with that one, as we all know, was the pressure regulating valves didn't work. That fire, which all the floors that were on fire were unsprinklered, cost the lives of 3 firefighters, and it burned for over 19 hours, but it never collapsed. They thought it would, but it didn't. There's other examples around the world where you can see the volume of fire, substantial fire compared to World Trade Center 7, and not a single building, Type-1 Fire Resistive building, has ever collapsed as a result of fire, except World Trade Center 7. The NFPA 921 Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations, the 2001 edition, mind you, wasn't followed. It was just ignored. None of these books, I read them all, I referenced them all, mention anything about high-rise collapse, total global collapse. They mention nothing about progressive thermal-induced collapse. Not even the newest high-rise book out of the FDNY by Chief Jerry Tracy, Chief Jack Murphy, and Chief James Murtaugh. This was published this year. It's a big, fat book, and I got it, and I read through it in the chapters I needed to, and there is no mention of this new phenomenon, this discovery from NIST. That's a pretty profound thing. If we can't, let me put it this way, one of these reports is right and the other one isn't. And if NIST is right, then our strategy and tactics need to change, because the potential of total freefall collapse is a danger and a hazard that we need to evaluate. And we can't tell when that's going to happen. We're not up there with thermometers. Or the University of Alaska report is correct, and our strategy and tactics are sound, as all these books, including mine, currently state. NFPA 1700, which was published in 2021, Guide for Structural Firefighting, mentions nothing of this new phenomenon. And this was published after the NIST report. If this is such a significant discovery, NFPA should have that in there. It's not in there. In fact, they still recommend that the firefighting strategy and tactics for high-rise remain the same. Lobby control, the IC post in the lobby at the fire alarm panel, and staging 2 floors below the fire. Well, it's problematic for all of us. And finally, I was urged to look at the documentary Calling Out Bravo 7, the 2020 edition. I reluctantly did, but I watched it numerous times, and there's just too much evidence. There's too much information and evidence for me just to ignore. And I have changed my position, and that's why I'm here today. And with that, I'd like to introduce Paul Cayley, retired firefighter from the UK, our brother from England, and the creator of the documentary Calling Out Bravo 7. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Raoul. I come here today from England because this is a very, very important topic to discuss. For background, I come from 30 years British emergency services, 5+ years as a police officer, and 24+ years as a firefighter. Over the last 2 decades, I've watched the fire service evolve and become increasingly scientific, to the point that firefighters today need to know more than they've ever needed to know before. Today, they don't just go to fires, they go to fires with context. Context determined by things like modern materials, modern chemicals, modern building designs, modern vehicles, electric vehicles, thermal runaway. And this, combined with the many different fires that they'll go to over their careers in many different types of structure, arguably gives firefighters an almost unrivaled understanding of what fire is and what fire is not capable of in the real world. When it comes to high-rises, fire services are so certain, so sure of the ability of these buildings to tolerate fires. They don't just talk about it and speculate about it. They stand deep inside the building, calmly and confidently while they burn. They do this in America. They do it in the United Kingdom. They did this before Building 7 came down, and they still do it today. And that should speak volumes and tell us all that we need to know. Now, I make these points because over the last several years, since I became aware of this, I've approached many experienced firefighters, and I've shown them the collapse that you've seen today, mostly without introducing any historical context so that they might consider it in isolation and without the prejudices of the day. Consistently, they have replied, it makes no sense. Fires, normal fires, cannot do that. Grenfell was Britain's worst ever high-rise fire. It burned violently both on the inside and the outside for over 24 hours. And sadly, 72 people lost their lives. For comparison, Grenfell was investigated immediately and unreluctantly, whereas Building 7 collapse didn't even make it into the 9/11 Commission report. Grenfell's evidence was preserved and carefully studied. Building 7's evidence was disposed of, with steel being shipped to China and sold. After Grenfell, lessons were learned, laws were written, and thousands of buildings were inspected for similar faults, unlike Building 7. And 7 years later, Grenfell is still standing, while Building 7 took only 7 seconds to fall. Early on in my research, I remember thinking, why isn't anyone in our profession talking about this? It's huge. And I was right. This should be, like Raoul said, one of the biggest fire service case studies in the world. And that's not the case. That silence motivated me to write this report, Sudden Building Collapse, an evaluation of that fire and that collapse from a fire service perspective. That report was later adapted into the documentary Calling Out Bravo 7, which goes into greater detail than we can go into today. And I recommend that you watch that for any more information. So, for the first Type 1 high-rise to collapse from fire in the world, you'd expect the fires to be quite incredible. As per NIST description quoted from the report, no, they were just normal office fires. As we can see, normal office fires on 4 out of 47 floors, low fuel levels, only 20 to 32 kilograms per square meter in any one area. Fire travel observing the laws of physics and fire travel, nothing spectacular or extraordinary. As NIST states in their report, only enough fuel available to sustain fire in any given location for 20 to 30 minutes. Some people say this building was burning for several hours. Yeah, it was. But it was only burning in any given location for 20 to 30 minutes. Here, inside Building 7, we have a picture of a typical office taken on the day. Again, nothing surprising. Normal office furnishings. Sensitive materials, paperwork stored in metal filing cabinets, which don't burn particularly well. And here, for perspective, to give an idea of what the fire was up against, this picture was taken in 1985, construction of the building. Workers are circled for scale, and you can see how robust and well engineered the building was. This thickness of steel was not only very, very strong, it had immense capacity for thermal absorption and dissipation of heat. This would have been later protected, fire protected, and as a highly protected Type 1 structure, the building had 3-hour fire protection on the main columns and 2-hour fire protection on the flooring assemblies, above and beyond what was required by law. If we look at this picture, where the arrow is indicating it's at 3:50 p.m. in the afternoon, the arrow is pointing to the 12th floor. This is the location of NIST's theoretical cause of collapse. Their theory required maximum temperatures at this location for the failure to occur. But as you can see, the fires on that floor have moved across to the right as we look at it, the west of the building, and this area has all burned out. That means that that area, the temperatures will be dropping, cooling, and steel will be contracting, not expanding. Basically, what we have here is a low-grade Type A fire in a high-grade Type 1 structure. Metaphorically speaking, like a small dog yapping at the heels of a giant. So NIST said that the problem with the fires was that nobody put them out because there was no water to put those fires out with. So I looked at the water supply for New York on that day. Due to lessons learned from historical fires, New York City actually has one of the most robust gravity-fed water distribution systems in the world, with huge volume capacity derived from upstate New York. Lower Manhattan is no less impressive, with huge 20-inch primary mains flowing from north to south. Importantly, with Building 7 upstream of the World Trade Center complex. Strangely, NIST claimed that Building 7 had its own unique water supply problem. And in their documents, they state, while the fires in the other buildings were actively fought, in Building 7, no efforts were made to fight the fires because of a lack of water supply. Well, that just doesn't make sense, does it? If there's water to fight fires in the surrounding buildings, why isn't there water to fight fires in the building? So, as an example of some of the evidence of the firefighting around the building, on the bottom right-hand corner of the picture, you see a healthy water stream from a firefighting jet. This is to the southwest and downstream of Building 7. There was also a fireboat in operation, pumping water into the fire ground. So the water supply was coming from more than one source. This fire engine is parked at the junction of Washington Street and Barclay Street to the north of Building 7. Building 7 can be seen in the background to the right over the top of the fire engine. And you'll notice by the yellow arrow that that fire engine has a healthy water supply being fed into it. They wouldn't be using the fire appliance if it didn't have water. This appliance is parked only 40 meters away from an FDC. For those of you who don't know what an FDC is, that's an FDC. Building 7 had two FDCs, one on the east and one on the west. These can be used to supplement water into the building to supply the standpipes and the sprinklers. In a formal interview under oath, Chief Peter Hayden was asked about the water supply at Building 7, and he confirmed that water was available for firefighting. NIST said that the sprinkler system did not operate on the first 20 floors. They blamed a poor water supply from the street water mains. But this can't be true because we have footage, which you're about to see, of the sprinklers in operation in the northwest corner of the building on the 7th floor. And if you look here, there and there, that misting that you see is the sprinklers in operation. The claim that water supply was a problem for the firefighting at this location doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Was there anything else going on inside Building 7 of interest? Well, yes, there was. Meet Barry Jennings on the left and Michael Hess on the right. They were both trapped inside Building 7 by an explosion, which destroyed a staircase at about 9:30 a.m. They reported thick smoke, high heat, and explosions before the towers came down. Their accounts strongly indicate that something else was going on in the building, something which NIST has failed to report. There are many other witnesses of explosions, but I can't include them all here today. Detailed recordings of their experiences can be viewed in the documentary Calling Out Bravo 7. And last but not least, in 2008, NIST was put in a position where they had to acknowledge that Building 7 fell at freefall. They stated on page 45 of their report, the north face descended at gravitational acceleration. This freefall drop continued for approximately 8 stories or 32 meters. In compliance with Occam's razor, this should have been the starting point of any serious investigation, as it is the strongest, simplest, and most reliable observation and evidence. Galileo stated over 400 years ago that for freefall to occur, there must be zero resistance. Galileo was right then, he's still right today. For Building 7 to fall symmetrically for 8 stories, there had to be zero resistance across the entire cross-sectional area and up through several stories in an instant, in a second. We know that normal fires can't do that. Something else must have been involved. I'd now like to hand over to Richard Gage, who's going to introduce us to the Fairbanks, Alaska University study.
The University of Alaska spent 3 years studying this new phenomena that NIST came up with in order to compare, because there were so many buildings that are similarly built. If this is a problem, we've got to get to the bottom of it, they said. In the comparison, they used the same input data that NIST used. They used 2 competing software programs. What is the conclusion? That the fire did not cause the collapse of World Trade Center 7. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. Thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and girders. And the building did not fail as a progressive collapse, but a global collapse caused by what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building. Their conclusion is illustrated on the left in their computer model, which appears quite similar to the actual collapse shown in the middle, which is the video. Whereas NIST computer model begins to crumple like a beer can, even though they had 7 years to come up with a model that they could try to justify their initiation of collapse. I'd like to introduce Eric Lawyer, firefighter of 25 years in the emergency services and 16 years with fire department, Seattle. Thank you, Richard. So why are we all here? Well, we're here because we care, because you care, and because the NFPA cares about firefighter and public safety. We're on the same team, you could say. So where do we go from here? Well, we're at a crossroads. NIST has declared that fire brought this building down. However, they used no physical evidence in their investigation. Imagine, how could this happen? For the first time, a high-rise collapses like this and no physical evidence used. What if in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire or Coconut Grove or MGM Grand, the investigators used no physical evidence? What codes would we have upgraded? What would have happened? So that's NIST. University of Alaska, their forensic engineers determined that fire did not cause this collapse, that it's not even possible. So if that's the case, we have another problem, and that is the trustworthiness and the integrity of our fire investigations on major fires. So where do we go from here? Well, if we look to the NFPA and their slogan that's up over here on the other side of the building, it's a big world. Let's protect it together. In the spirit of protecting it together, we respectfully request that the NFPA formally review the collapse of World Trade Center 7 to determine what's needed next. And we've written a petition in support of that. I'm going to read that now. We, the undersigned, care deeply about firefighter and public safety. We respectfully request that the NFPA perform a formal review of the collapse of World Trade Center 7. The purpose of the NFPA review is to consider both the NIST report and the UAF report to determine the actual cause of collapse so that national fire codes and standards remain up to date, accurate, and reliable in the interest of firefighter and public safety. Specifically, if WTC 7 collapsed from normal office fires, then the appropriate codes and standards related to high-rise firefighting tactics, construction, and fire safety systems need to be reviewed and updated in order to reflect the new potential risk of sudden and complete collapse of Type 1 constructed buildings by office fires. Or if WTC 7 collapsed from something other than fires, then in order to clear up the confusion, we owe it to the public and the fire service to dutifully declare that we have determined that fire was not the cause of the collapse and reassert the current national fire standards related to high-rise firefighting tactics, construction, and fire safety systems are accurate and trustworthy as written. So how can you help? Well, signing the petition is a great start. We want to show the support this community has for this new formal review. And share the petition. Then stay in the conversation, which we mean email updates. We will keep you updated as things unfold, and you can share your ideas and questions with us. You can also join our team. If you're into this, join our team and or a working group. There'll be more information on that later. And the big one, reason we're here today is because of the documentary Calling Out Bravo 7. It influenced many of our team members to see that something has to be done. So if you can watch that and share that, and for all of these, you can go to protectingall.org, and there's actually there's a QR code up here you can scan. We'll be passing things out later or as soon as we're done. So stronger together, same team. On fires I have responded to, when it got really intense and things weren't going right, and we'd occasionally see crews butting heads. And it was always reassuring in the smoke and the heat to hear a voice or voices calling out, "Same team, same team." And what that voice was doing in that moment was reminding all of us, to stop this, that we are on the same team. We're on the same mission. Now let's get the job done. And that reoriented us. So we understand reviewing the collapse of Building 7 and questioning the official narrative is intense and it's hard. And we want to leave this clear message with the NFPA and its members. We are on the same team. We, as Protecting All Protectors Alliance, will do whatever we can to support this. We also want to thank you and the NFPA for your willingness to listen to us today and the opportunity to speak with you. So I want to leave it with, just remember, same team, same mission. Now let's get this job done. So thank you.